let's start, inshallah. And let's start, inshallah. So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. So, inshallah, today we're still talking about marriage contracts. Remember, we said, let's look into this slide really quick just so that we would know where we're at. We said that the pillars of a marriage contract are basically three things. One, the offer and consent. And we went in some details in regards to that. So here we go. And we also talked about the wali. But in terms of wali, let's look into the other slide, and in terms of wali, and see what we talked about in terms of wali, because we went into lots of different details about the wali. Let's look into that one. And certainly when we're speaking about wali, certainly we talked about the wali in terms of abusing their position, and we also talked about what is called adl al-wali. Remember that one? We talked about adl al-wali, and we went in details with the wali, and we talked about, well, who is capable of being the wali. So we covered all of that. Now we went into another slide, and that slide was in regards to qualification in marriage. And we said the relationship between talking about the wali and the qualification in marriage is basically because if we are talking about the main premise is the girl's interest. So we're talking about her interest, not her interest, meaning what she desires. But what we mean by her interest is basically what serves her interest, what serves her the benefit, basically, not what she wants. Just because somebody wants something, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what what serves her interest. So that's why the wali is basically there to be on board, to make sure that she is making the decision to serve her interest. So we also got into the qualification because of a number of different reasons. We were talking about the qualification because if we're talking about serving her interest, then certainly the question on, is this marriage basically showing signs of a successful marriage and basically serving her interest or not, that's basically what we would look into. So we're basically collecting the data about this candidate that's coming over to ask for her hand in marriage. And we would also need to make sure that this candidate is basically compatible for this woman. So in order to see if he's compatible, of course, certainly we're going to look into age, we're going to look into education, culture, profession, and certainly piety. And of course, piety is the number one thing, but I just wanted to include what people usually look for. The first thing, as a person that used to do marriage matchmaking, the first question people would ask me is, number one, age, number two, marital status. In other words, if they had a divorce before, if there are children involved, and things like nationality. What nationality is this person? In other words, to look at what culture we're talking about, and certainly languages, and certainly we're talking about documentation, legal documents, and all of that. That was always basically necessary to ask about. And certainly we did go in certain details in regards to these qualifications. And we said that the main thing that we are trying to get to in a marriage is communication, dialogue, mutual respect, all of that. And certainly to enhance that, we basically look at the compatibility in number of different angles, whether it's piety, and what we mean by piety, basically religiosity, but we're going to go in details with that, because how do you measure religiosity? What do you mean by religiosity? What does piety even mean? Job. And we talked about job, and we said that it goes in different corners. And certainly when you're talking about job, you're talking about income, and you're talking about social status, you're talking about privileges that you might be using, losing, or perhaps even not having. So when you look at job, you're not just looking at, yes, what the amount of time this person is spending trying to, I guess, put in a service or an effort in, but you're talking about a certain dynamic that will affect the marriage, that will affect the relationship, that will affect the person himself or herself. And certainly we talked about the wealth because, anyways, it's basically the reason for getting a job. Freedom, we said the word freedom is not talking about how free a person feels about him or herself, but this is talking about the context, whether we're speaking about slavery and freedom in that sense. So, of course, doesn't exist today, thank God. And we also talked about ethnicity. We talked a little bit about ethnicity, but we also said that even in the books of fiqh, the part in the piece about ethnicity, there was a lot of culture involved in it. And it many times it wasn't necessarily an objective or completely objective, I guess, scrutiny in terms of ethnicity. There was a lot of culture involved in how they also had scrutinized ethnicity. So they had, or at least some fuqaha considered that if somebody is Arab, then therefore that are a higher, type of nobility, and therefore looking at other nationalities as, questioning whether these people would be compatible or not. But I said, and I made it clear that nationality, whether we're speaking about Arab or we're talking about tribal differences, or whether we're speaking about, whatever group of people we're talking about, in general, we said that certainly some scholars in fiqh may have studied these matters and considered that compatibility may not be fit if we're talking about somebody that is probably of a dark skinned compared to somebody that is light skinned, and or even Arab compared to somebody that is probably Persian or any other nationality or any other race or whatever it is. And we said that that was really the influence of their culture at the time and not necessarily the text itself speaking. So just keep that one in mind. And this is something very important to, I guess, to mention, that not necessarily everything you would see in fiqh would necessarily represent what the religion is saying. Sometimes you just got to keep in mind that these people are human just like you and I, and may sometimes be influenced by the culture, by perhaps our own gender possibly, or even a number of different factors that may affect the person. But in order to see whether this is based on, let's call it Islamic grounding, let's call it text, then that's a different story. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says a certain matter, then we're just going to take that because it is part of our faith. Then that's a completely different founding and a completely different foundation. So we did talk about some rulings on qualifications for another reason, which is to enhance the right for one, the wali, to make sure that, of course, they have let's say the foundation on how to advocate for the girl's interest, in her interest, basically, how to advocate for her. And certainly, she can then say, well, I'm the one that's getting married here, then therefore, how are you going to be getting on board, and why are you the one that's deciding on who the right person is for me? And then, of course, might actually get into this debate on who is the right person and what is the right person, and certainly the wali himself. And we were always emphasizing that the wali is a place of taklif and not tashrif. And that was extremely important to keep in mind because, of course, you would have certain people, including the Arab, so including Muslims. Some Muslims may see it as tashrif and not only taklif. So what's the difference between the word taklif and tashrif? So the word taklif means it's a position of responsibility. It's not a position of honor or a position to somehow just be in authority and not necessarily be in responsibility. So this is extremely important to keep in mind. So the premise that many of the questions would arise from is thinking that it's all an issue of giving this person honor. So why should he have the honor if he was not in my life, if he was not involved, if he was basically the person that divorced my mother, I don't know, 20 years back, and right now, why should I consult my wali when it comes to this? And of course, this becomes on the premise thinking that this is tashrif and not taklif, but this is a taklif. Just because somebody is probably lacking deen, somebody may not be, let's say, the upper level and the high level of deen, does not necessarily mean that they lose this responsibility to get involved, to advocate for the daughter or for the sister to make sure she's making the decisions that are for her own interest. Just because somebody is probably not praying or probably maybe not, I guess, so much involved in deen, it doesn't mean that we would say, well, you know what, we're also not going to get you to pay child support. Well, just like you would say pay child support, that's the same type of involvement. Child support is perhaps maybe a monetary type of involvement, but when we're speaking about wali in a marriage and making the right decisions, that's a different type of involvement, but really it falls within the same area, which is advocating, which is giving support, which is holding responsibility for this decision that was made. Are qualifications obligatory to have in marriage? We went in details with that, and we said, in general, if there's a mutual consent between both sides and both are accepting perhaps somebody lacking certain areas of compatibility, if both sides, whether we're speaking about the wali or whether we're speaking about the daughter or whether we're speaking about the groom himself, of course, if everyone is accepting all of this, that's all that matters. And therefore, there's nothing that would be considered as voiding a marriage contract just because they may lack compatibility. But we also said this comes in handy mainly when we're speaking about perhaps the wali may be coming in to complain about the compatibility that it's not there, and therefore he would come in to say, well, I'm sorry, but my daughter cannot get married to this person, and here's the reason for that. And he'll basically talk about those areas of compatibility. So we're talking about the qualification, basically. Is this person pious enough? Does he have akhlaq? Does he have a job? Does he have this? And we said that scholars had, I want you to pay attention to this one because this one's key. We said scholars had differences of opinion. So you had the majority of the scholars, they considered the compatibility between Muslims is, number one, whether this person is pious and whether this person has good akhlaq. They said as long as these two are there, that's what basically makes, I guess, the key difference, the key issue to talk about. All the other details is mainly discussed by the Hanafis mainly. That doesn't mean other scholars did not discuss it, but I'm just letting you know how scholars may have discussed this matter. So you had the Hanafis were actually the most to expand the area of compatibility, and what they regarded was making a fair a fair qualification or a fair compatibility between the two, because anyways, for the Hanafi madhab, they had regarded that a woman can speak on her own. That doesn't mean that she can necessarily get married without her wali, but they considered it as mawquf. So in other words, he doesn't have to be present, but she's making the offer and consent. Okay, but the wali is aware of all of this and just being quiet about it, then that would basically mean he's consenting to it, even if he wasn't necessarily present on site. Okay, so that was the whole argument. But the other scholars, they considered that no, an offer and consent can never be made by a woman because that's the wali's job. And they looked at the different evidence that the ayat were always directing at the men. لا تعضلوهن فانكحوهن. So it was really always directing at the wali, or the awliya, at least in terms of plural, to make sure that they are the ones that are making the leadership, the decision making that is in favor for the woman, and that they are the ones were that the words were directed at. In other words, it's a responsibility. Okay, now those that considered religiosity and piety, they actually had their evidence. So we discussed some of those evidences in terms of religiosity and piety, and we said that they have strong evidences, but we said regardless of those opinions that talked about another or other areas of compatibility, we said at the end is that in different times, different cultures, different situations, when we're talking about compatibility, those areas of culture, the areas, let's call it the circumstances that surround the situation at the time, even if the person probably had good akhlaq and good deen, but other areas that probably were relating to the circumstances that we're living today. So maybe they didn't have the right documentation, the legal status. There was a problem in it. Or perhaps maybe a job, not lack of compatibility in job, lack of compatibility in height, lack of compatibility in weight, in, just, or probably body. And we're talking about body. Somebody is blind, somebody is not blind, somebody is perhaps maybe lame, the other person is not lame, or maybe she's extremely beautiful, but he's not. These things can we consider that within culture, that these things do matter, and then therefore the wali said, I'm sorry, I don't want to move forward with this because, hey, there's a weight problem issue here. And I, as a doctor, recognize that when we are talking about an obesity with a BMI of this much, this would actually mean high chance of probably cholesterol, high chance of maybe diabetes, high chance of all of these different things. And then later on, I've actually had cases, believe it or not, I've had cases where I believe the person was like 350 pounds or something. And this woman came to me and she was complaining that she wanted a divorce because the person was extremely overweight, that this overweight and this big size body was basically causing erectile dysfunction. So yes, when you look at, it's not necessarily based on this case alone, but we already know that things like blood pressure, things like cholesterol, diabetes, heart problems, that all of these different things and other things do affect one, libido, two, do affect the person's sexual desire, and three, definitely affects the things in causing erectile dysfunction, or even causing a number of different areas to basically, let's say, act as a disability, really, a sexual disability. So just keeping that one in mind. Okay, so let's say the father gets involved and says, hey, here's why I am objecting to this. And let's say he brings this forward. Okay. Now when we speak about the wali and having the right to object and advocate, and of course the daughter might say, well, this isn't advocating, you're just obstructing my right, you're just obstructing my freedom. Okay, that's when the qadi will basically use his investigation, and based on his investigation and his, let's say, evaluation and all of this, and say, well, I'm sorry, but he has a point, or you don't have a point, or you've got a point. And in situations where the wali may not have a point based on the qadi's evaluation, then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically or the Prophet ﷺ had ordered that as-sultanu man la waliya lah. Whoever does not have a wali, then the person in leadership, the person that is the person that is acting as the qadi, is basically going to be in that position, taking over the position of the wali, to make sure that we are acting on behalf of the girl's interest and not necessarily some authoritative position that someone is enjoying. Okay, so just keeping that one in mind. Now, the other thing, we also emphasize that when we're talking about these qualifications, certainly people have different habits, different behaviors, different manners, lifestyle changes, legal situations definitely have a big impact. Financial situations definitely make things different, and therefore all of this is to basically be taken in consideration, and the qadi or even the fatwa during that time might change. Just keep that one in mind. لا ينكر تغير الأحكام بتغير الأزمان. In situations where this can mean a real serious issue, such as a person does not have legal papers, he's good in his deen, he is, let's say, I don't know, educated, doctor, whatever it is, and he's making a certain amount of money, but then he basically is coming in on a visa, and a student visa, and then this visa is going to be ending on this and this date. And maybe she couldn't do a petition for some reason, okay, or didn't want to do a petition to basically give him the papers, or probably, give him the legal status. And the father might have felt that, hey, I don't necessarily see that this person is compatible, because I'm still really skeptic whether he is really interested and really compatible to you, or whether this student doctor is feeling that once they finish their degree and that they did not reinstate their legal status, so he's basically looking to get married because he wants to stay, for example, in this country. So he's looking for the nearest opportunity, and that happens to be basically you at this time. So the father feels skeptic about this and basically decides that I don't want to move forward. But the girl says, but he's a doctor, he's educated, he's going to be making great money, and hey, I can petition for him and all of that. And this I had seen often. So just to note. Now, if the qadi, please pay attention to this one. If the qadi basically looks into the father's objection, and the girl was presenting her, I guess, her support for her opinion, and then the qadi looks into both arguments, and then the qadi finally makes his say. And once the qadi makes his final say, that becomes mulzim. Okay, what does that mean? It becomes obligatory to embrace there. Once the qadi gets involved, then at the end, that's it. The qadi, once he had his say, then you're going to have to respect that. And remember, rizq will come. Once the qadi says his word, that's final. Not that, oh, well, anyways, he's a misogynist from day one. I know, anyways, I was the other day walking with his wife and she complained about her husband that he doesn't even respect her. Therefore, yeah, he's actually a person that is not necessarily a person of integrity. So therefore, I don't have to take his words. Sorry, but that's not actually acceptable. The qadi's words, they become mulzim, becomes obligatory for you to take. You can appeal, that's okay. You can appeal, but not until, and of course, the cases of appeal, it doesn't mean that they have to accept every time you appeal, by the way. And this is very common that women would come and she would say, well, I did want to do an appeal and they didn't accept it. They don't have to accept the appeal every single time you object to the appeal. Only 4% of the cases in American courts get accepted for an appeal. In American courts, okay? We're talking about, those cases, those serious cases. Okay, now, of course, when you see the compatibility and the scholars and their input on what they make, sometimes you would see that they based it on text, and sometimes it's not based on text, and sometimes it's based on, let's call it, experience and this anecdotal piece of it. Just keep that one in mind. So in other words, it's an influence of culture or probably personal experience, etc. And therefore, when you speak about compatibility, just keep that one in mind, that not necessarily do scholars all agree on what qualifications and what to look for. So therefore, that's really left for you to do your homework to make sure that this person is really compatible for you, and whether this person basically has the keys to a successful marriage. Just keep that one in mind. And, unfortunately, what we see often is just other people doing what is called tahbib. Let me say the word again, tahbib. What is tahbib? Tahbib is basically other friends, other people, acquaintances, whatever. They might actually get involved and then think that they're doing the wife a favor and might actually somehow get involved and start spewing all this anger, all this hate, all this mistrust, basically in the wife's heart or even the husband's heart. Okay. And then whether it's the in-laws, friends, possibly other people, basically spewing within this person's heart to hate their spouse or to feel that they were victims. This is the most common one. To make them feel that they are victims and that they have to leave, and that you are just basically giving them a nice advice that is just a compassionate advice and so forth. Please, with the cherry on top, please stay away. And if the person is not feeling safe, everybody knows how to get out. Everybody knows how to find basically the police number. Everybody knows how to basically recognize that there's something called marriage counseling if they're interested. So at the end of the day, just don't get involved and think that you are necessarily fixing things, but let them. And since this person is a grown person, they might have to do their responsibility in seeing their own potential, their own power to basically decide whether they are ready to leave or not. So in other words, be careful from doing what is called the takhbib. This is called the takhbib, talking to her and that she's a victim and that she has to leave and all of that. And sisters, just keep in mind, when it's your family or others, when they get involved trying to do takhbib, if a divorce were to happen, you just gotta remember that the most one that is going to really suffer outside of this marriage and then feeling that it was basically a failure, or feel guilty about certain things, or feel perhaps that the children are paying too much of a price, etc. Just keep in mind that the most ones that are really going to be feeling your pain is really yourself. All the other people, whether it's your family or all the other people out there, even if that was called a therapist, they're going to give you the advice, but are they necessarily going to be there to cover your expenses, to basically be there during the night when you are really longing for your children, or longing for your own home, or longing for a husband, or your probably chances are slim to remarry, etc. So therefore, you just got to keep in mind, if somebody is doing takhbib just because it's so easy to demolish something, but to rebuild requires a lot of potentials, requires a lot of money, requires a lot of patience. So just because somebody appears to be doing something in your favor, but what they're doing is takhbib, to appear like they're coming in as basically caring, compassionate for you, don't get carried away with that. But ask yourself, are these people ready? Are they going to really be there and probably help me find a place to live in? Probably be there when I'm struggling being away from my kids, when I'm struggling to find another spouse, etc. Or they're just going to be there just to basically give me cheap advice. This is cheap advice. A cheap advice is when you would give a person an advice, but then when it comes to paying the price of involvement in the aftermath of that advice that they had done, are they going to pay anything? Are they going to get involved in anything? Or they just gave you this advice to appear that they are caring, but they're not really going to be there? That's a cheap advice. It's so cheap, and it's so easy to just tell somebody, you know what, this person is not right for you. This person is this, and this person is that, and basically give a cheap advice. It's too cheap. If somebody is not paying the price for it, then that's a cheap advice. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala got the wali on board. Why? Because they have to pay a price. They have to pay a price. They have to be involved financially to basically support this woman. And that's why it's important that when you want to give an advice, you just make sure not give a cheap advice, because if you are not ready to really pay the cost in the aftermath of this advice that you are taking, please don't get involved. Because the cost, if you're not capable of investing in it, and you're probably maybe going to invest one time, I don't know, buy her an ice cream or buy her a cake or whatever it is and give her that. That's cheap, man. That is a cheap advice. And unfortunately, many, many, many times I had seen that, especially in women's circles. Sorry, ladies, especially in women's circles, that, she would be there to buy her a flower, to invite her, I don't know, for a coffee. And she would think, wow, she's so nice, she's spending so much, but not recognize that the amount of money that her parents or her family is probably spending on her and giving her a living, etc., is a lot more than this decoration that this person basically put out there. Sometimes people see the decorations and they don't see the infrastructure. They just see the decorations. Oh, this is a nice decoration, and yeah, she invited me for a cake, invited me for, I don't know, this and that. That's a very cheap thing. But what we really need is a person that is willing to invest when things really go wrong. Okay, now let's go for the other thing, which basically is piety. Now, just to remember, we did talk about the part about piety, and we said in regards to piety, we said that marriage between Muslim women and non-Muslim men is totally forbidden. There's no question about it. There's not a single scholar. If there was any scholar that had mentioned that it was permissible, trust me, I would have said it. Just like I said, all those different things that people had said, or some scholars had said about Black men marrying white women and so forth, and or even Arabic and Persian. Oh, I don't mind saying that some scholars had said that. But just keeping in mind, no scholar ever said that marriage between Muslim women and non-Muslim men, that it is anything but forbidden. All agreed that it is forbidden, and no scholar ever said that it was permissible. Okay, so when you say religious, what do you mean by religious? Like, how religious? What is the definition of a religious person? So piety means when we're speaking about piety, we definitely have different definitions of what makes a person pious. You may have a definition that, hey, this person is basically praying, fasting, does not drink, does not do zina, and you're like, wait a minute, this is it. This is the basics. Another person, no, I want them to do qiyam al-layl. I want them to be a person of reading Quran, a person that memorized Quran, a person that, but let me say one thing, ladies. Spirituality, a person doing Qiyam al-Layl, a person going to the masjid, is a good sign, but that's not what really defines religion. Those things, that defines a Muslim. But a real mu'min is a person that is willing to live the akhlaq. What do we mean by live the akhlaq? Meaning they would be willing to give up on their own wealth, give up on a lot of things just for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered them to do so. The worst characteristic you can have in a person is being selfish and cheap. You know why? Because when a person is selfish, that just means they're so self-centered, they don't even care about others. When a person is selfish, that means they really lack the akhlaq. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, when they asked, well, who's the chieftain around here? And they said that person, على بخل فيه. The only problem he's got is that he's very selfish. He's very stingy. And he said, وَأَيُّ دَاءٍ أَدْوَى مِنَ الْبُخْلِ. What's a disease that is worse than being stingy? And of course, somebody might say, well, it's not being stingy, but it's an issue of money management and all of that. You know, some people might have different definitions for a certain behavior or certain descriptions, or let's call it a diplomatic description for a certain behavior. So just keeping that one in mind, when you look at piety, you need to just remember a person's spiritual piety is one thing, and religious integrity is a different thing. Just keep that one in mind. What really matters, certainly, you won't be having religious integrity if you did not pray. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as religious integrity if you didn't fast, if you didn't pay zakah, if you qualify to pay zakah. So therefore, when we're speaking about staying away from major sins, okay, that's like the ABC of that's the basic ground for a Muslim. But if somebody is wanting to go up a level, one of the worst akhlaq is basically drinking and zina. Those two can literally damage the family. Zina and drinking. And drinking is even worse than zina. way worse. Because with zina, you may be talking about STD, but with drinking, you're talking about one, their deen gone wrong, their life gone wrong, and everybody's life that is basically living with them is gone wrong, and their aql has completely demolished everything. And the number 4, they may get into zina without them even knowing. And number 5, the money. This is all expensive, and their money management and their whole money is basically just all invested in alcohol. Drinking is way worse than zina. Okay, let's continue. And of course, we talked about the marriage between Muslim men and Muslim women, non-Muslim women, or non-Muslim men. Okay, hold on. Muslim women and non-Muslim men. Okay, now why the wisdom behind not approving a fasiq? Wait a minute. So who's a fasiq anyways? A fasiq is a person that does a sin openly. That's a fasiq. A sin basically becoming a person's character. That's a fasiq. Like, give us examples. So you've got major sins, you've got minor sins. Major sins, zina, alcohol, drugs, those are major sins. Minor sins, I don't want you thinking that the word minor just means it's not a big deal and it's okay. It's a secondary thing. No, when you say minor sin and major sin, the difference between a major sin and a minor sin, first, let me make that one clear. A major sin is a sin that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made it punishable in this dunya and the akhirah by telling us this is the punishment. A minor sin, the Prophet ﷺ had told us and foretold us that this is a sin not acceptable. The religion of Islam basically forbids a person doing such a thing. That would be a minor sin. Okay. But we don't have a state or at least a text that would tell us of what the punishment, whether in this dunya or the akhirah, and what it would look like. Now, do all scholars agree on the definition of major sin and minor sin? The answer is no. So ghaiba, for example, speaking ill about someone behind their back, is that a major sin or is that a minor sin? Well, scholars have differences of opinions on how to classify it. Is it minor or major? So just to let you know, just keep that one in mind. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا جَاءَكُم مَّن تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ إِلَّا تَفْعَلُوا تَكُن فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ كَبِيرٌ. And certainly the Prophet ﷺ said, if you were to get a person basically coming in which you are content of their religion and their mannerisms, then get them married. If you don't, then expect a major corruption to happen on earth. So what does that mean? Do I have to approve? No. If this person is not considering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's regulations, whether in dealing with women or in dealing with money, men, mainly, you would know their akhlaq when it comes to money. You would know their akhlaq. Women, on the other hand, you would know their akhlaq when it comes to their own self and their own body and their own ego and their own tongue. Did you just say tongue? Yes, I said tongue. Does she know how to hold her tongue? Or whatever's on her mind, she says it. Most of the sins that women would engage in that really corrupts their marriage is basically their tongue. What do you mean by their tongue? Yes, it's a metaphor, but one doesn't know how to speak. And I don't mean by doesn't know how to speak, the language. No, I mean, doesn't know how to use her voice tone. Her voice tone is either condescending, voice tone is authoritative, voice tone is mean, repetition, repeating everything on and on and on and on, yelling when she's angry. Her voice is always loud. Whenever she's basically, whenever somebody disagrees with her, she basically starts then acting in this type of offense mode, just offending people. That's lacking the akhlaq. I'm not saying men can't be like that. Absolutely, you can have men like that. Absolutely, there's no question that men can be like that too. Narcissism is not exclusive to anyone, okay? But this is one of those traits that many times, especially that sometimes people can be very impulsive. And of course, when it's in a household where the man is leading the household and she basically gets angry and starts talking and talking and talking, and the man is so angry, and then here we go, what are we doing? She's basically acting impulsive and he's acting impulsive as well, and they're at each other's throats. And then what they end up with is basically, hey, if I've got fire and you've got fire, we're just going to burn the whole thing. Learning how to control your tongue, learning how to speak at the right time. And what I mean by speaking at the right time, if you get in a dispute, your husband is away, don't send messages. Where are you? What are you doing? All these different things. Just wait till he comes back. Unless you're sending one message or two messages to correspond, basically, okay, to whether something happened or not, or needs help, or if he's okay. I'm not talking about that. I'm actually talking about the type of messages that you went into a dispute, and then this person, you're messaging him SMS or WhatsApp or whatever it is, and you're contacting this person. Who knows if they're on the street or they're probably having a moment of probably illness, high blood pressure, whatever it is, without you knowing. And then wait till the person comes in, choose the moment, evaluate their psychology. Are they ready to talk? Learn this thing from business. People are more willing to compromise when they are happy. If you want him to compromise, to give you the permission to visit your parents, give you the permission to probably go here or there, whatever it is, or give you any permission to something, remember this. When people are content, when people are happy, when people are feeling satisfied, they are more willing to compromise. When they are emotional, and I'm not talking about emotional meaning anger, but I'm talking about emotional meaning either very sad or meaning being very happy. That's when, if you needed something, now is the time you can ask. If this person is not willing to communicate, maybe in your words, they might sound as very offensive to him. And sometimes men can hear your voices. And this is actually science, by the way. This is real. They did these MRI scans. And when a man hears a woman's voice, the MRI or even the scans were showing that their brain is giving them a different type of a rapid what do they call that, a rapid show. Well, something is basically appearing on the screen that, when they hear a woman's voice, their brain basically acts completely different, in a completely different way than when they would hear a man's voice. Yeah, it's quite interesting, whatever, regardless of the science behind it. Okay. Now just recognize that, don't talk too much, and make your words short, your sentences short, and get to the point. Learn how to get to the point. If you don't know how to get to the point, if you don't know how to control your voice tone, then maybe take the time to use perhaps ChatGPT and say, hey, I would like to ask my husband this and this, but sometimes he accuses me of being authoritative. Give me the right way to say it. It's okay. Use ChatGPT. At least, right now it's probably better than getting another friend maybe giving you the wrong advice. Okay. But yeah, I'm not saying go and tell ChatGPT your private issues, because guess what? These things are monitored. So just when you thought ChatGPT was going to be your virtual friend that is going to keep secrets, think again. They basically revealed that everything's being recorded. Okay, let's continue right there. So the wisdom behind not approving a fasiq is that he will not consider Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's regulations in dealing with you. You're going to be there alone, and this person might make up a lie. Who knows what they could be doing? But generally, a Muslim is supposed to not befriend a fasiq anyways. Why? I mean, whether we're speaking about a friend or whether we're speaking about a person to be next to and hanging out with, or whether we're speaking about a spouse. A person that is fasiq, a person that doesn't take religion seriously, is not a person that you want to hang out with, because they will rub on you without you realizing. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَعْرِضْ عَمَّنْ تَوَلَّى عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا وَلَمْ يُرِدْ إِلَّا الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and you have to keep away and turn away from those that would stay away from the dhikr. This isn't talking about somebody doing just dhikr, the oral dhikr, but this is talking about behavioral dhikr. This is talking about audio dhikr. This is talking about perhaps the different forms and the different areas of applying the religion. This person is fasiq. Don't even befriend them, let alone getting married to them. So the other thing is that, what about an innovator? Okay, what do you mean by an innovator? An innovator is basically a person that may innovate, start, or probably practice something that the religion / the text itself does not approve of. Let's give an example. Somebody that is Shia, perhaps. Okay, a Shia. Is it permissible for this woman to marry a Shia? So here's a couple things. Number one is that a Muslim is not supposed to support any innovator or innovation in general, okay? And therefore, in terms of marriage, we're not supposed to be supporting this, but when it comes to the marriage itself, is the marriage valid or not? So the marriage itself would basically first need to be scrutinized whether this innovation goes beyond innovation to probably being at the border or even be identified as kufr. If it is kufr and not necessarily an innovation, then just as we said in Surah Al-Mumtahina, لَهُنَّ حِلٌّ لَهُمْ وَلَهُمْ يَحِلُّونَ لَهُنْ. They are not permitted to marry the Muslim women, and the Muslim women are not permitted to marry them. That was pretty straightforward and pretty clear. Okay, there's no question about that. If we then were not sure about the choices, the religious choices, or the preferences, or the I guess the interpretations that this person has, we're not really sure about, then we'll ask a scholar. We'll ask a scholar, is this considered kufr or is this considered an innovation? If it's within innovation, let's say, and take an example as a Shia. So Ibn Taymiyyah, and I want to quote one thing about Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah was really a great scholar, and I would say he did not get the appreciation that he deserves. And you had many, in fact, I was doing my master's thesis, and it was about the portrayal of Islam and Muslims in the new conservative media. One thing they considered as what would define a person that is a radical Muslim or a person that is conservative, they regarded that if they were to quote Ibn Taymiyyah, whatever, right? They are to quote Ibn Taymiyyah and regarded that Ibn Taymiyyah was one of the godfathers of terror, one of the godfathers of radical Islam and all of that stuff. SubhanAllah. It's quite sad that we would also see some Muslim groups, instead of embracing these great intelligent minds that basically had invested within the Muslim community, but then instead start attacking them in ways that really makes them fully blind from using and even making use of all the investment and all the intelligence and all the great investment that they had done for Islam. Okay, let's see. What did he say? He said the plain Shia, are astray. So we're talking about Shia in general. Okay, that the default ruling. So when you say astray, what do you mean by that? Well, a Muslim man should not have his daughter married to a Shia. If a man marries a Shia, the marriage is valid. Okay, wait a minute. I thought you said he wasn't supposed to getting his daughter married to a Shia. Okay, let me explain this statement right there. So when you speak about Shia, there are different levels of Shia. Okay, we're speaking about some Shia that may not necessarily be within the area of kafir. You have other levels of Shia that no, they're not necessarily kafir. They just regard Ali ibn Abi Talib, probably even Ali ibn Abi Talib or even other al-Bayt as better and more important to other Sahaba. So although they may be classified as Shia, or they are classified as Shia, but this isn't like a person that regards that the Sunni and that practicing what the Prophet, what we had basically in terms of reference as telling us the information about the Prophet, and therefore we would regard that as a reference. So if a person is denying completely the reference, so in other words, let me first break it down here. When you're talking about Shia, what do you mean by Shia? What do you mean by Sunni? Okay. So when you talk about Shia, it really started out when there was a dispute between the Sahaba on who is supposed to be the Khalifa after the Prophet. Well, this political issue became a religious debate. Then the Shia regarded it as a religious debate, and therefore they went farther than just disputing on who's supposed to be the leader after the Prophet. Is it Abu Bakr? Is it Umar? Is it Ali ibn Abi Talib himself, etc.? Then this became, to the Shia, not a political debate, but more of a religious debate. And therefore, anyone who had opposed Ali ibn Abi Talib's right to be the Khalifa is considered to basically be a kafir. A kafir, a person that is going against Ali ibn Abi Talib, to them, even if it's a political dispute, was enough to get them out of the fold of religion, and therefore you had different kinds of Shia. So you had one form of Shia that did not necessarily regard the people that opposed Ali ibn Abi Talib as kafir per se, but they regarded them as not necessarily making the right opinion. Okay, that's one type of Shia. You had some Muslim scholars, just like in Nasa'i, for example, he regarded that Ali ibn Abi Talib was better than Uthman ibn Affan, was better than Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And he's basically one of those references that as Sunnis, we would basically take. And it wasn't just in Nasa'i, but you have many other scholars as well that Muslim Sunni would actually regard as key references for our Islam, basically, because we regard that as a political opinion and not a religious opinion. But once this political opinion goes from a state of denying even the Sahaba or reinterpreting the Quran in favor of a religious, or their religious opinion, or their religious, let's call it at least ideology. And then now, yes, They would regard Sayyidah Aisha as basically a prostitute, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, or even regard Sahaba like Umar ibn al-Khattab as kuffar and their Sanamai Quraysh and the idols of Quraysh and all of that, then this goes in complete opposition to what the Quran was also teaching. The Quran, and we know the ahadith were coming in, and the ahadith, the Prophet ﷺ was actually endorsing Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, a lot of those Sahaba. In other words, for Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we would take whether it's Ali ibn Abi Talib, whether it's Abdullah ibn Abbas, whether it's Sayyidah Aisha, whether it's Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Uthman bin Affan, Abu Huraira, all of those, as a Sunni Muslim, we would regard that the Prophet ﷺ was teaching Islam and that all of those Sahaba were adl, were qualified, were having and containing religious integrity to basically have a type of a cumulative, let's call it a cumulative right there, community that was supporting one another to pass on the information for the Prophet about the Prophet, whether the teachings, whether Islam, and so forth. Now, for the Shia, for example, they'll consider only Ahlul Bayt qualify to basically pass on this information about the Prophet. Any other person is not going to be qualified. Okay, any other person does not qualify. And therefore, when you look at the references will vary. You'll say, Sahih al-Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ had said, and here's my reference, it was mentioned, and my reference is Sahih al-Bukhari. They'll tell you, I'm sorry, but I don't actually agree with Sahih al-Bukhari. I don't even consider that the hadith in there are even valid. That's what a Shia person will tell you. Now, I want you to look into the practice. If we were talking about a marriage, does that make it a valid marriage or an invalid marriage? So then we would say, okay, to first determine whether this is a valid marriage or not a valid marriage, we would first have to see where they are in terms of this Shiism spectrum. Okay, that's the first thing. If they are on innovation side, then this marriage is valid. But if they are more on the kufr side, then this marriage is not valid. What do we mean by kufr? Whether we're speaking about negating that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had negating that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically chosen his message to be on the Prophet. You had some other Shia, they would consider that no, the message was sent on to Ali ibn Abi Talib, or that it was supposed to be on Ali ibn Abi Talib, or even consider that there's no such thing as what the Quran today, what you have today, that it's complete. But that's actually incomplete, and there's going to be the complete Quran Fatima, and that's what they would consider, that the Quran between your hands is basically incomplete. And then, of course, goes to another level of another type of Shi'ism, that no, it's not only that we regard you and regard Sunni Islam as kafir, but willing to engage in things exactly like what happened in Syria and basically kill. That's a different level right there. And even another level is basically considering that that religion itself, the inspiration itself, you don't get it from the text, but you get it from this leader of theirs, and who acts as a Sayyid, and that this Sayyid gets direct information from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They do have, I mean, al-Kullini, al-Kafir al-Kullini, Bihar al-Anwar, all these different, these different references that act as a hadith. I'm not saying they don't, okay? But the Sayyid and even the whole practice of religion is really evolved around the story of al-Hasan and al-Hussein and when they got killed. And certainly we don't regard that the killing of al-Hussein was at all approved or something acceptable whatsoever. We don't regard that, just as we don't necessarily regard as Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan as necessarily kafir. So just to keep that one in mind. When we look at these figures, I mean, okay, they're figures in history. Why should I even care? I'm just going to get married and live with this person, why does it even matter how they viewed something, a story in history, which of course I'm not going to be living in? That's something that passed 1,400 and some years ago. So why should I even care about that? Why does that even matter to me? Okay. So it matters for a number of different reasons. Number one is that what do they carry as a reference? So what do you mean reference? So I'm saying, in order for you to consider something being your right or his right or your responsibility, let's give an example. You consider that temporary marriage is not permissible. And he says, well, it's permissible for me. I went to this woman, got married to her for 3 hours, and then we basically ended the marriage. Oh, really? For Sunni Islam, that's zina on the spot. There's no such thing as getting married to a woman for 3 hours or a day or a month or 3 months or whatever. There's no such thing. Just by having that intention, that's going to nullify the marriage. But for this person, he says, my act and my marriage was completely supported by the religion, and you have no right to object it, because by objecting it, according to his reference, you're objecting the religion. But for you, that no, we cannot have temporary marriage. What's your evidence? Well, I've got a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually says, according to Ali ibn Abi Talib, that the last thing that the Prophet ﷺ had forbidden in regards to the mut'a or the temporary marriage is that it was impermissible. And he basically had said that it was going to be impermissible, forbidden till the day of judgment. Oh, sorry, but where's your hadith from? It's actually stated right there in Bukhari. Remember, I'm Shia, I don't believe in Bukhari. Then, okay, what are you going to do now? See what I mean? So when you talk about in theory, you might say, yeah, well, I mean, some scholars regarded it valid. But when you put it into practice, you're going to come across variant, at least fiqh. You're going to talk about a number of different things that will affect the marriage without you realizing. And you're definitely going to end up as a woman needing to compromise because you don't want to risk your marriage, you don't want to risk your children. So that's why Ibn Taymiyyah continues, and he said if there's hope that she would repent, basically we're talking about right now a Muslim man marrying a Shia woman, okay, then it's best to leave them getting married if we're talking about that. But what if it's the other way around? Okay, just keeping that one in mind. Okay, now if it's the other way around, then we would definitely advise against it, because you're going to end up really risking and perhaps maybe even needing to jeopardize your own deen just for somebody in dunya. And this is key. You know, we see this all the time, that somebody might fall in love with this person and they're just living in this strong romantic emotion that they're willing to give up on their deen. Is Jannah really that cheap to you? Is it not worth it that you would give up on a person just for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's very sad to say that a lot of Muslims, they really lost their aqidah. Okay, let's continue about the other part. Progeny. Well, what do you mean by progeny? You're talking about ethnicities. Want to mention that one because, you know, when you're looking at scholars, Shafi'i, Hanbali, they did consider certain ethnicities like Arab, Persian, and they considered them as of a higher progeny. But guess what? There's really no evidence to prove that. I mean, why Arab and Persians? What about the other nationalities? What about the other ethnicities? Fulani, Chinese, Japanese. A person that never went outside of their own area becomes the person that is very myopic, that doesn't know that this world is a vast world, and that people, regardless of their ethnicities, they can have a lot to contribute in the society. and they can be smarter, they can be wise, they can have their experiences, they can be better in their akhlaq, they can be people that may actually be a lot better than what you had expected. We usually focus on certain ethnicities. One main reason is because of our own supremacist mindset. Only a supremacist person would think that their own race is beyond all races. And we had seen what this type of supremacy had resulted, whether during the time of the Prophet ﷺ in Jahiliyyah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it Jahiliyyah numerous times in the Quran. So to consider one race above another race, and we had seen not only in the Arabian Peninsula, but we had seen this type of racism and this type of supremacy and what it resulted in, whether we're speaking about World War I, World War II, or whether we're speaking about in Gaza, the Jewish supremacy right now, or even in the US with Trump being there, basically the white supremacy, the KK, and all of those different things that basically had led to a lot of bloodshed. And right now, even in Sudan with UAE basically considering that Sudan itself, that these people basically lack humanity. The second that you think that someone's resources are basically your place of interest and that human life is not worth respecting because to you they're basically of a different race, then there's nothing more evil than that. But just wanted to note that, in some books of fiqh, they will discuss races, but I would say that's more of a cultural influence back then. A cultural influence back then, I guess, Arabs were living at a certain status, and certainly you're talking about, the world is not exclusive of Persians and Arabs. You got the Kurds, you got the Turks, you've got the Chinese, you got all these different races and African races. Many African races got Africa as basically the biggest continent right there. Certainly not necessarily, I don't know if it's the most populated one, but thought it was really China, Asia. Thought that was the most populated because you got India and China. That's it. You're making the whole population of Earth. Okay, but of course, like I said, this has no evidence and it was based on culture, but which is why the Maliki scholars have denied all of that and considered that it all depends on piety and any form of regarding I guess, progeny and ethnicity, that it's basically baseless, which is really definitely really true. What is important is basically piety, and any ethnical preference has no evidence. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakari wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu inna akramakum 'indallahi atqakum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, oh people, we have created you from male and female, made you into tribes and nations. لِتَعَارَفُوا. What is لِتَعَارَفُوا? لِتَعَارَفُوا. You would learn from one another. You would basically share experiences. And how do you share experiences? You don't just share experiences, hey, one day this happened to me. No, this isn't just that. Right now, we're talking about shared experiences. We're learning from one another. We're learning and expanding our vision from one another. There's no better way to expand vision, except, and mostly, the best way is to basically get married from one another. That's basically how you would expand your area from being a supremacy to being this type of inclusive and basically expand your vision. What about wealth? Hanafis do consider wealth as an important factor in qualifications. Okay, why Hanafis? Why not the other ones? Well, majority of the scholars don't consider wealth, since it doesn't always last. They said it doesn't have to be. A person can be rich today and poor tomorrow. That's not necessarily going to make them more qualified simply because they have the money. Money is not a center of qualification, but it's a factor or perhaps something to look into as a plus, but is not necessarily what they would consider. Okay, how do I apply that? So if, let's say, a man that is a very poor man, and this girl is a very rich girl, and this man is coming to ask for her hand in marriage, but she basically said, I'm interested in this guy, he's good deen, good akhlaq, and the only thing is that, yeah, he's poor, but I'm okay with it. For a Hanafi judge to solve the dispute between the daughter and the father, he'll say, sorry, my dear daughter, that is, the judge will say, but your dad has a point. You're right now talking about it as an emotional thing, but in real life and when reality happens, money is crucial to making your marriage basically a sustained marriage. A marriage that is stable, a marriage that is this, your father has a point. For the majority of the scholars, they said, no, marriage can go, wealth can go and come, and just because this guy is a poor guy doesn't mean that we're going to reject him. He's got the deen and he's got the akhlaq. We're not going to take the father's objection, at least some of the majority of scholars had said. We're not going to take it. So why not? The scholars that considered it a major issue, they depended on the hadith Fatima bint Qais. What about the hadith Fatima bint Qais? Remember the hadith Fatima bint Qais when she came to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, Mu'awiyah Abi Sufyan asked for my hand, Usama ibn Zayd, and so did Abu Jahm. Well, the Prophet ﷺ told her, don't get married to Mu'awiyah Abi Sufyan. Why not? Because he said, he's extremely poor. So they said, here we go. The Prophet ﷺ rejected Mu'awiyah Abi Sufyan. And just a note, who's Mu'awiyah Abi Sufyan? Mu'awiyah Abi Sufyan was one of Katabat al-Wahy, was one of the ones to scribe the Quran. Just to know, that's Mu'awiyah Abi Sufyan. His father was actually a chieftain of Quraysh. Remember, his mother is Hind bint Utbah. She's basically a leader. And guess what? Mu'awiyah Abi Sufyan in the future was going to be the Khalifa. Now, you just keep that one in mind. But the Prophet ﷺ told her, he's right now, he's poor. Don't accept that marriage. Okay, Layla Ali, you want to say something?
Assalamu alaikum. If a woman chooses to marry a guy that's less wealthy than her, does that mean she gives up her right, like, to be provided for?
Does she give up her right to be provided for? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, like, does he no longer, like, that's one of her rights that she has to, like...
No. He still has to provide. But then here's the thing. Here's the thing, Dave. Guess what? Then they debated if this woman is a wealthy woman. She's a rich woman. She comes from a rich background, upper class, and this guy is a lower class. Okay? She already knows that he's lower class, but she still insisted that she wants this guy. And the majority of the scholars, they said, well, poverty is key, and yeah, but majority of the scholars, they considered that no, as long as he basically has the money and he does, as long as he has the akhlaq and the deen, that's all that matters. Now, in practice, he still has to provide for what he's capable of providing. You have an income of $2,000 a month. That's your income. Yes, that's all my income. And you do recognize that means you're going to live in a studio, and you're basically going to be living barely furniture at home. You're definitely going to be doing a lot of money management to basically live like that, because that's all he can afford. Ibn Taymiyyah, who's Hanbali madhab, he regarded, well, that's not enough. He has to basically do his homework to provide for her to live like the social status that she was living in. I mean, so what's he going to do? He just doesn't have the money. Where's he going to get the money? So that's why Ibn Taymiyyah was like, well, if you don't have these kind of means, before you leap, seek before you leap, before you jump into something that you cannot afford. Well, make sure you think before you actually jump into something that you cannot afford. Because a rich girl, she's used to, I guess, probably having a maid and probably not even cooking, wanting to order food. It comes to her ready already. And a maid would clean the house. She doesn't even wash the dishes, probably doesn't even know how to wash the dishes. And she's probably not used to even doing her own bed and cleaning the house. Oh, this is a rich girl. She's basically these upper class girls that doesn't do any of that. She basically had in her family's house a maid hired that was doing all that work. Oh, so you have to hire a maid? Well, according to Ibn Taymiyyah, yes, you have to hire a maid. But according to the other scholars, no, we're not going to hire a maid for her. She accepted to get married to this poor guy. Well, girl, now you're going to have to wash your own dishes. You're going to have to clean the bathroom yourself, and you're going to have to clean everything by yourself. And guess what? You're going to have to cook by yourself as well. And not only that, guess what? You probably have to make your own bread. You're going to need the dough. You're going to probably even, sew your own clothes. Sorry, there goes all your name branded clothes. Sorry, this guy can't afford it. So just understanding that piece of it. Okay. So one thing I would say is that, those that considered wealth to be part of the qualification, then they also differed in the amount. And of course, just to say, if they differed in the amount, what are we looking at in terms of amount? How much is the amount? And should it be basically just the capability to pay al-mahr, or is this to live based on her social status? Based on whose social status are we going to be considering? On his social status? Because you and fiqh, every single person is, if he's going to be the person to do the nafaqah, then it's going to be based on his sa'a, his own capability, and not her capability. We already know she comes from a rich family. We already know that piece. But does that necessarily mean that we're going to base it on her, on her standards? Whose standards is it going to be? It's going to be right now. There's, even for those scholars that said that it's supposed to be based on her standards, it's so easy to say based on her standards, but where's he going to get the money from? In theory, yeah, right, nice. But in practice, that's impossible. That's impossible. If he doesn't have the money to buy you a Rolls Royce and to buy you, these really expensive cars, he just doesn't have the money. To you, this type of car, is like, oh, it's just a mean of transportation. To him, it's probably all the money that he'll be making in 9 years. 9 years. So before you get into being too utopian in discussing that in theory, you have to apply it on ground and then basically understand, how do we put this together? So then how do we understand these categories? Poor, middle class, lower class, or how do we understand all of those classes? At the end of the day, do we get into these classes and probably even enhance such classes by saying rich girls don't marry poor boys, like in Great Gatesby? Okay, does that mean that that's what we're going to do? Or does that mean that we just have to be realistic before we basically make a judgment on something? We have to be realistic. We have to be realistic and just recognize many rich people, they don't really understand what it means to be poor. They don't understand. They can't imagine it. They cannot imagine. I know my children, for example, right now, alhamdulillah, we're living, alhamdulillah, middle class. But in one point in my life, I lived an extremely poor life. At one point in my life, extremely poor life, where we had no food in the fridge for weeks. Extremely poor life. Where my mother would go out just in the backyard, just collecting anything green just to cook. There's nothing, literally nothing to eat. Extremely poor life. Water, not even enough water, where we had to dig and basically get the water from the well and put like a hijab basically on the bucket, pour the water inside basically this hijab and let basically the hijab to basically be what takes away all the parasites. And that was basically, hey, lucky enough to get that water. You drink it, you basically drink all those eggs that managed to go through the hijab and basically in there, and you definitely ended up getting abdominal pain and getting all these different parasites in your stomach. But hey, you either drink that or you drink nothing. And definitely, so it was a lot of hard work, working in the field, working and collecting basically the animal droppings and working in that farm and etc. Rich people don't imagine. My kids, I know they cannot imagine what it means to live this kind of a lifestyle. They would think that you're exaggerating when I would say that to go to school, we needed to walk 5 miles to go to school. What do you mean walk 5 miles to go to school? Yeah, we needed to walk almost 5 miles to go to school. For a child today, just going probably and just barely walking a few footsteps, that to them is so hard. Imagine walking 5 miles to go to school. They would think you're exaggerating. It's like, what? What are you talking about? Yeah, we would have stray dogs, actually, 20 stray dogs just following you and right there and barking at you right in the middle of the street. And what are you going to do? And all these different stories, they can't imagine it. They'll just imagine and think of you as exaggerating, and all these TikTok videos basically making fun of the parents and making them look stupid and silly and exaggerating and all of these different things. And of course, TikTok videos and these shorts and reels making fun of the parents. And that's why many kids would actually make fun of their parents, because of these TikTok videos really making their parents look stupid, look exaggerating, look as if they are really silly. And what do you end up having? You end up having these children basically disrespecting parents, because it's all backed up by these kind of shorts and these kind of reels. Allah al-Musta'an. All right, now when we speak about wealth, this is a very, very important thing to look into. Many girls, especially upper class, they would think of wealth as, oh, I'm willing to live a poor life and I'm willing to sacrifice for this romantic relationship. But then when she lives the situation, she didn't expect that would be that hard. It's not a utopian thing. It requires a lot of involvement. It requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of body work. It requires a lot of compromise. It requires a lot of deprivation. It requires that you would wake up at 6 a.m. just to basically knead the dough. It requires perhaps maybe you not getting a lot of different things, or probably even buying your clothes from thrift stores, because you can't afford to buy your clothes from those normal stores that you would buy from usually, because that's all they can afford. Or probably used items from garage sales or things like that. Well, if you're capable of living like that, I would say, well, go ahead. But if you're not capable of living like that and you're disgusted, you definitely don't belong in that. And you gotta live realistic, move on with your life, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send you another rizq. But if you're so disgusted from being and probably sharing the same plate with other people, because you're disgusted sharing the same plate, you know what? You don't belong in that life, because Being poor means you share the same plate, you share the same bread, you share the same food, you share the same water, you don't have a lot of utensils. And yes, definitely the extravagant life, you got to give that away. If you're not ready for it, don't get into that. If you're living this romanticized image, don't get into it. Okay, what about job? Of course, when we're speaking about job, this depends on culture, which is why they discuss the details based on their life matter. So when, for example, at the time, al-faqih, a person that studied fiqh, was considered like today what a doctor is or a politician. They're considered the really upper class. That's the faqih. Okay. A person that was a teacher was considered an upper class at the time. Today, a teacher is struggling to pay their own, expenses. Okay. So when you consider job, you consider a lot of times the money, the social status that basically comes out of what we mean by a job. And certainly the details they used to consider whether this job was considered a low class, middle class, upper class, in other words, basically a social status, that was really left for the culture. And therefore, just recognize that you put it within the context of what this means. One, what this means in terms of social status. Two, privileges. Three, income. Four, certainly the area they're going to be living in and what that looks like. And number five, I would add to that the number of hours being spent. If this is a person that works overtime, let's say at a hospital, and probably maybe needing to be on call frequently, and you cannot handle this kind of job, well, maybe you're just going with the wrong person. In other words, recognize what this job really means before you get into that. Certain jobs, it requires that this person does work as basically behind his desk and basically maybe just so focused on his screen or basically just studying. My husband is an author 24/7. He even dreams of his books, literally dreams of his books. He would dream that he's writing a note and he would wake up and he's like, I had a dream about this word. I had a dream about this quote or whatever it is. And he would wake up and dream just about it. Everything is just evolving about his books. If that's a person that basically right there, you're understanding that that's what it means to get married to such a person. If you can't handle a person that is focused basically on his screen and basically on his books or basically on his job or perhaps maybe on his customers or whatever it is, then if you know yourself, you can't handle that, well, maybe you should seek something else. Maybe this isn't the right fit for you. What if I'm in it? Well, if you're in it, then maybe we can work out a plan, or you can work out a plan with him and say, okay, how about we give you all this, look at the 24 hours, 8 sleep for you, 8 hours of sleep, 7 hours of sleep, whatever is right for your body. And then I want you to give me, let's say 2 hours. This is away from screen time. Even your phone is gone, even, all of that. When we're just wanting, start out with perhaps maybe 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week, and say, let's do it on the weekend. We're getting 4 hours a week that we're going to go out. We're going to, I guess, I don't know what is important to you, whether it's going to a restaurant or probably, doing your favorite, I don't know, your favorite thing, maybe just sitting out on the porch, whatever it is, or playing with the kids or going to their game or whatever it is. Okay. If that's important to you, that maybe you can start out with that. Starting out with 2 hours, 3 hours, start out with something that is small and then gradually growing with it. If this person is not communicating, then I would suggest perhaps maybe sending it as an email. They're not even opening the email. Maybe you could modify your words. Maybe you can say it in a different way. And perhaps remember this. People are willing to more compromise when they're happy. see what makes this man happy, to basically get your words heard when they are in a state of happiness. There's going to be each man has what makes him happy. Is it food? Is it calmness? Trust me, ladies, if you want a happy husband, or if you want a husband that is compromising, make him happy by making him happy. Number one, do not talk too much. Number two, do not repeat too much. Number three, don't be too insisting. Number four, nagging and nagging and nagging is definitely not going to help you. It's not going to help you. It's just going to get things even worse. To their brain, nagging just feels like you're hitting a hammer on his head. You know what he's going to do? He's just basically going to start acting in this defense mode, and will probably decide, you know what, this is too much on me. And if you think that you're bringing him closer, no, he's going to get out of the house. You didn't win. You just lost. You didn't win. You just lost. So be wise, be intelligent in how to get your word out by seeing what makes him happy. Is it a moment of calmness? Is it a moment of food? Is it a moment of perhaps family, that he's with his family? What makes him happy? You have to do your homework, and one person to another is different. Okay, so that's one thing. Got to understand this job and what it really means in terms of implication and its effect on your life. If you're not ready for such a job and the implication and the amount of hours, then I would say, you know, maybe this is not the right thing for you. If you're a woman that is extremely jealous and this man is going to be, I don't know, dealing with a lot of female patients, definitely, you're probably going to get overjealous, and then you're going to get into this, this doubt. Maybe he's seeking a second wife. Maybe he's this, maybe he's interested in this, or oh, what about the nurse? What about this? Then you know what? This is probably not the right person for you. He deals with a lot of female customers, female, maybe employees. If this is you got to know yourself before you start looking for the other person and what they basically have in qualification. Just keep that one in mind. So you got to know yourself. What are you? Are you extremely jealous? Are you extremely lazy? And therefore you cannot handle doing all the house chores and all of that. If you're extremely lazy, then you can't marry a poor boy, because it's going to require a lot of hard work. And if you are, for example, this person is just talking about, he's just a person that is book smart, and you just feel that, to me, it's all question marks, don't even understand what he's saying, just all question marks. Well, if you can learn, good for you. But if to you, you know, I'll just sit there and just listen, but I don't really understand, and I don't have any interest to educate myself, then, and this person's always, you know, probably kind of like an autistic person, and all they're talking about is basically their education and their degrees and basically what they had read and all of that, then there's no communication going to be happening between you and this person, because they're so fixated, like a person that Asperger's or autistic, you know, they're just so fixated on that, that even if you were to say, hey, I'm, you know, what do you think of my dress? Nice. And going to be talking about their, I don't know, their physics class or their physics experiment or whatever it is. Well, yeah, what do you think of my hair? They're just fixated on their, I don't know, physics class. So just got to keep that one in mind. If you're somebody that loves attention, maybe this isn't the right person for you. So certain things, I don't want to make things complex and complicated and all of that. I just want us to sometimes recognize that when such things do come forward, that there are things to see, things to study, and things to that require a lot of compromise, and that not because two might have been in a disagreement, it doesn't necessarily make them both evil or any of them evil. Sometimes they just couldn't get along because one might be too lazy and the other one is probably too active. One is too talkative and can't basically stay quiet, and the other one is just can't handle a lot of talking. I remember, just on the side, one of my children is autistic. So I remember he was only 4 years old. He wasn't talking, okay? He didn't start talking until he was almost 5, 6 years old. And that's basically, by the way, that was the age I started talking in, okay? 5, 6. All right. So you're basically the victims. All right. So I remember my son, I was making an appointment. He does recognize, and he did recognize that I was making an appointment for him. And he said, Mama, no woman doctor, no woman doctor. And I said, why not? He said, women talk too much. Women talk too much. And I'm like, okay, I'll make sure it's a male pediatrician, not a female one. He's like, women talk too much. Hudhaifa, no like hearing. I'm like, okay, no like hearing. Okay, that's fine. So, I guess, I don't know what kind of right now, mashallah, he's very verbal, doing great in school, and definitely not where he was at before, but alhamdulillah, I right now start to doubt whether that classification of even autistic was even a fair classification. Well, regardless, I'm not a specialist, but they were the specialist that said he was in, but whatever. Let's see. The sister is saying, I have a question. Is it more severe marrying non-Muslim woman than a Shia? Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. There's no question about that, dear. I mean, this woman at the end of the day believes Muhammad ibn Abdullah is the prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, believes Al-Quran, believes in Islam basically in general. All right, there's no question. There's no question. There's no comparison even. There's no comparison with a person, Shia with a Christian or a Jew. There's no comparison whatsoever. You can't compare these two. This is a Muslim that that I guess went wrong in certain details, but they're Muslim. And that's a person that completely negates Islam entirely. There's no comparison whatsoever between a Shia and a Jew or a Christian. Not even the slightest comparison. Okay, so if there are any questions before we end right here, and oh dear, what did I just do? I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Let me tell you what we're going to do, inshallah, until you decide. We're going to talk about, let's see, we're going to talk about handicapped or diseases. And, oh, I should have finished that one. But the other thing that we're going to cover next week, inshallah, is basically this slide. This is a very, very fun slide. Okay. Types of marriage contracts. Let me show you that. Okay. What is that? So the types of marriage contracts, you've got, what is a temporary marriage? And what is nikah al-shighar, nikah al-muhallil? And what about things like zawaj al-misyar? What does zawaj al-misyar even mean? There's such a thing. What about zawaj friend? Is there such a thing? What about urfi, the urfi marriage? I've heard a lot about that. What does that even mean? And in all these different marriages that we have today, what about online marriage? What is the ruling on that? So this is what we're going to talk about next week, inshallah. And let me tell you just a fast thing. Mut'a, there's no question about it, but shighar, that's an issue in certain countries until now. But il-misyar is the one that il-misyar, the friend, the urfi, those are the ones that are becoming probably the frequently most asked about. Give you an idea. Okay. She says, I'm wealthy enough. I just want this. I just want to marry this person. He doesn't need to spend a dime. I'm basically wealthy enough. I just want him to come to me, and basically a halal relationship. And just that he doesn't have to even spend time with me, just probably 3 hours, maybe a week, or maybe every 3 days, and basically just come over, just be a friend, or probably be intimate. And we're married. He didn't want to tell his first wife, but yeah, so this is basically that Misyar reason that I'm going for. So what is the ruling on that? Someone might ask. All right. And this is common in certain areas. So we're going to talk about that, inshallah. And what about Zawaj friend? They're university students, and these university students, they're not ready yet to live together. So there was a suggestion that they would each be still in their own home, in their parents' house, but they would get married and basically meet every once in a while, and basically can be intimate with each other to protect themselves from zina, but they're still not living together. What about the urfi marriage? So yeah, we didn't need to register our marriage because of legal issues, so we decided to go for urfi marriage. What is the ruling on that? Okay. So that and other questions is basically what we're going to be discussing next week, inshallah. So many things to discuss, inshallah, mashallah, we've got a lot of people joining us right there. And if anybody would like to ask a question, or even give me a suggestion, or say something that they would like to say, go ahead. If not, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop the live stream.